Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Mad Barn Academy. And if you're new here, welcome. We hope to earn your subscription today. Our video today is the final installment of our three-part series on equine gastric ulcer syndrome. If you haven't seen parts 1 and 2, go ahead and do that. I've included the links to those 2 videos in the description below. Those videos are going to cover different types of gastric ulcers in horses, as well as current diagnostic and treatment options. So they both give some really good background information and are a really good lead up to today's video. Our focus today will be on prevention strategies. What sort of management and dietary changes can we make to reduce the risk of ulcers? So let's get started. So let's quickly remind ourselves of the risk factors for both squamous and glandular ulcers. For squamous, we know that ulcers form in the squamous region of the stomach due to prolonged exposure of the squamous epithelium to stomach acid. Factors that increase the risk of squamous ulcers include fasting or meal feeding, diets high in carbohydrates or large grain meals, high intensity exercise, and anything that causes delayed clearance of digesta from the stomach. Conversely, the cause of ulcers forming in the glandular region of the stomach is thought to be related to disruption or weakening of the glandular protective mechanism, so that mucus bicarbonate barrier that we've talked about. Risk factors for glandular ulcers include anything that causes physical stress or illness, greater than 4 days per week of exercise, regardless of intensity, and inappropriate use of nonsteroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. So basically, our prevention strategies are going to be aimed at minimizing or eliminating those risk factors involved in ulcer formation, as well as just generally promoting good gut health. Obviously, not every horse will be able to avoid every risk factor, and that's okay. The goal is to really minimize as much as possible so that we can do our best to support digestive health. I've broken down prevention strategies into 2 categories, those targeting management and those targeting diet. So let's kind of go through each of these in more detail. So when we talk about management changes, we're often talking about reducing stress in that horse's life. Stress elevates cortisol levels. When chronically elevated, this can decrease prostaglandin levels. This is important because prostaglandins are involved in maintaining that mucus barrier in the glandular region of the stomach. So by mitigating stress, we can hopefully maintain the integrity of those protective mechanisms and promote good gut health. So horses are very sensitive to change. I think this is something that most of us can appreciate. Things that we as humans don't perceive as stressful can be very stressful for horses. And those things can include transportation, changes in their environment, changes in herd dynamics, an irregular feeding or an irregular exercise schedule, lack of turnout, etc. Therefore, taking a really comprehensive look at your horse's husbandry and lifestyle to identify potential stressors can really help shift the focus towards a low stress management program, which can really benefit these susceptible horses. Okay, so here are a few things to think about when looking to minimize your horse's stress. First on the list is going to be establishing a routine. So horses are very much creatures of habit, and establishing a predictable routine can help them feel more comfortable in their environment. One study identified multiple caretakers as a risk factor for glandular ulcers, which really highlights that even seemingly small changes in routine that seem innocuous to us, something as simple as switching who's feeding that day or switching who's mucking stalls, may be enough to induce stress in these horses. Second on the list is going to be avoid big changes in environment and routine. So looking for ways to minimize transportation, avoiding changes in herd dynamics whenever possible. So trying not to introduce new horses into the herd or switching your horse's pasture mates frequently. And then once settled into a particular stall or pasture, avoid changing it unless it's strictly necessary. So points 1 and 2 here are really big points, particularly for performance horses. So I think a lot of us forget how stressful the life of a performance horse really is, particularly if that horse is seasoned and they're used to shipping and showing. But it's important to remember that even if these horses appear to cope well with their lifestyle, it doesn't mean that they're not experiencing some amount of stress. For these guys especially, it'll be important to establish routines away from home so that there is some consistency in their life, even when they're off the farm. Okay, number 3 on the list is going to be avoiding stall confinement as much as possible. So horses confined to a stall may become bored. They may run out of food in between meals if they don't have free choice access to hay while in their stall. And certainly studies have demonstrated that horses confined to a stall for prolonged periods of time can have increased markers of stress. Some horses may even develop stereotypic behaviors like cribbing or weaving due to boredom and lack of mental stimulation. So, this is why regular turnout is recommended whenever possible for horses prone to ulcers. It's good for their brain, but it's also good for their digestive health as well. Number 4 is to avoid isolation from other horses. So, this is a really big one that people often forget about because it's become really normal for horses to have individual turnout. However, we know that horses are herd animals and highly social. On an instinctual level, there is safety in numbers, so it's not natural for them to want to be alone. Of course, group turnout may not be safe for every horse, like stallions. If that's the case for your horse or your boarding situation, then at minimum, another horse should always be within eyesight. And that includes both when your horse is in the barn stalled and when they're out on pasture. They should always be able to see a neighbor very close by within eyesight. A few other management factors to consider that don't necessarily have to do with stress include avoiding exercising on an empty stomach and minimizing the use of NSAIDs. So for the first, it's super easy to have a hay net available while you're grooming or tacking up. So during exercise, gastric acid can splash around, particularly during more high intensity activity. So consuming hay right before exercise can actually act as a barrier to prevent acid splashing. For the second, it's really important to remember that NSAIDs are necessary drugs in some situations, so don't be afraid to use them when they're needed. However, you should consult with your veterinarian to ensure that you're giving them correctly. This includes ensuring you're giving the appropriate dose for your horse's size, you're administering those doses at the right intervals throughout the day, and coming up with a plan for how long that treatment course should be. All right, so now let's kind of switch gears and talk about the second category in our prevention strategy, which is diet. We have several different dietary changes that really target those risk factors we talked about to promote good gut health and reduce that risk of ulceration. First on the list is going to be avoid intermittent feeding or avoiding meal feeding as much as possible. So, feed in the stomach buffers acid and creates a barrier that protects the squamous epithelium from acid exposure. Long stretches without access to food can actually increase stomach acidity, making that environment even more conducive to ulcer formation. That's why we recommend these at-risk horses have constant free choice access to forages throughout the day, or at least avoiding prolonged periods of time without access to food. When free choice access isn't feasible, using hay nets is a really great way to extend the amount of time your horse spends eating because it's going to really slow them down. Second on the list is consider adding some alfalfa to your horse's ration. So, alfalfa can be really beneficial for these horses that are ulcer prone because alfalfa tends to be higher in protein and calcium, both of which help buffer those gastric acids. However, it's important to realize that alfalfa may not be an appropriate forage option for every horse because it does also tend to be higher in calories. All right, number 3 is sort of a big one here because there's a lot of different moving pieces to this number 3 bullet point. So 3 is to limit grain consumption. And there are several reasons why concentrates in the diet can increase the risk of ulcers. Firstly, chewing grain takes less time, which means horses produce less saliva compared to if they're chewing hay. This means that there's going to be less saliva to buffer gastric acids once that feed enters the stomach. Second is concentrates exit the stomach more rapidly because they require less breakdown and less digestion, which can increase the amount of time on an empty stomach, particularly if that horse is being fed in large, discrete meals. Thirdly is the increased production of volatile fatty acids, or VFAs, lowers the pH in the stomach. So what happens here is volatile fatty acids are produced from bacterial fermentation of feedstuffs. Usually we're talking about this occurring in the hindgut. And when produced in excess, these VFAs, like when horses are receiving large concentrate meals high in carbohydrates, those VFAs can decrease colon pH, leading to hindgut acidosis and microbial dysbiosis. This process can also occur somewhat in the stomach as well. So it's going to lead to that more acidic stomach environment. So at the end of the day, there are several reasons why we would recommend limiting grain consumption for these at-risk horses. If we have a horse that is on a high concentrate diet, what we can do is replace some or all, potentially, of those concentrates with more gut-friendly options like beet pulp, alfalfa, ground flax, oil, etc. There are a lot of different options that we have available to us. So if you think that your horse would be a good candidate for a dietary change like this, but you're unsure where to start, don't hesitate to reach out to a nutritionist for help. At Mad Barn, our nutrition team deals with diets like this all the time, and we can really help you formulate a safe and appropriate diet to fit your horse's particular needs. I've included a link to our free diet evaluation service in the description below, so don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions. To wrap up dietary changes, the last 2 factors on our list to consider are water and then digestive supplements. So number 4, ensuring that your horse has constant access to water. This might seem really obvious or a little bit silly, but water is often an overlooked predisposing factor to gastric ulcers. Research has shown that horses without free choice access are 2.5 times more likely to develop gastric ulcers. So it's really important to ensure that your horse always has access to clean, palatable water. Make sure there's no debris in troughs or buckets that would discourage drinking. Make sure those automatic waters are working, etc. Last on our list here is the use of digestive aids or digestive supplements. So certainly products like this can help support a healthy digestive tract. Some ingredients have been studied in research and have been shown to be beneficial for supporting gastric health in particular. Those ingredients or ingredient combinations include pectin lecithin complex, amino acids like glutamine and glycine, yeast probiotics, a few different herbals or extracts like slippery elm, marshmallow root, meadowsweet, licorice. There's a lot out there, which can make navigating what products to choose really challenging. So I've included a link to our article on ulcer supplements in the description below, which goes into the research behind these ingredients in much, much more detail. It's really rather comprehensive. So if you're interested to learn more about picking good ulcer supplements, go ahead and check out that article. Alrighty, you guys. So that concludes our series on equine gastric ulcer syndrome. Let's finish up today's presentation with 5 key takeaways from the series as a whole. Number 1, equine gastric ulcer syndrome is one of the most common digestive issues seen in horses, particularly our competition horses. It's extremely common across all disciplines of performance horses and can negatively impact both health and performance. Number 2, is gastric ulcers can develop in either the squamous portion or glandular portion of the stomach, or both simultaneously. These 2 types of ulcers have distinct etiologies or mechanisms behind the disease process, which has clinical implications regarding treatment and prevention. 3, The clinical signs of gastric ulcers are highly variable horse to horse. So if you think that your horse might be acting ulcery, it's best to involve your veterinarian so that 4, you can get an accurate diagnosis. This will really help guide an appropriate treatment and prevention plan for the future. Lastly, number 5, taking prevention strategies seriously can significantly reduce the occurrence or recurrence of gastric ulcers in your horse, particularly in those susceptible or at-risk horses. Obviously, not all risk factors are avoidable for every horse, but doing your best to minimize or eliminate these risk factors plays a really important role in prevention. Even making a few small changes can have a really big impact for these guys. Okay, here are references for today, and thanks for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and be sure to explore the other videos on our channel. We have a lot out there, and we're adding to it constantly. I hope that you feel equipped to take this knowledge and implement it into the management program for your horse, as well as feel more educated about the why and how of equine ulcers. Also, don't forget to check out the additional links I've provided in the description below. All right, you guys, I really appreciate you taking the time to listen and hope you learned something. Until next time.